Welcome to Getting Started, a series of interviews about how inspiring people started their own careers and what advice they have for you to do the same thing. My name is David Newman. I'm a co-founder of Happs. And because of the advice and mentorship I have been lucky to receive from others, I've been fortunate to have a fun and rewarding career. I created this series as a way to pay it forward and help others do the same thing. My guest today is one of the top real estate brokers at one of the top companies in one of the top real estate markets in the world. He's brokered some of the largest real estate transactions in LA, including headquarters for DirecTV and Snap. And just this last year, in the midst of COVID, he set the record for the largest real estate transaction of the year for a wonderful, exciting new company called Beyond Meat. Gary Horwitz, welcome to Getting Started. Thanks for being with us.
It's an honor and a privilege to be here. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Gary, please tell us, how did you get started? That's quite an impressive career. How did you start?
Oh, well, how far back do we want to go?
As far as you want. As far as you want.
Well, why don't we start with college? Because I think my path hasn't been completely linear, and we've pivoted a few times and made some interesting career choices along the way. So it might be interesting for the audience to hear about some of the decisions I had to make along the way. Mm-hmm. So if we started college days, I went to UCLA, I grew up in San Diego, came up north to UCLA, really without any clarity on what I wanted to do with my life. I'll say, and it's a theme of what we might talk about today. As we sit here today, I'm still not sure, right? There's evolving things and twists and turns in the road all the time. But at UCLA, I was a psychology major just because that seemed like a really interesting topic to me. And, thought about as I went through UCLA, thought about a career in psychology. When UCLA, it came time to make the next step, I debated between a master's in psychology, going on for additional education there, or I decided to go to law school because law school sounded interesting to me. Not necessarily a burning desire to be a lawyer at that time, but an interesting just kind of life choice.
Right. And you figured having a law degree would just open up additional doors for you, or did you like the idea of studying the law? What were some of the factors in your evaluation of that?
Yeah, all those things. Definitely a general interest in the law at that point, and a realization, which I think absolutely played out to be true. A law degree is a really good general background for a lot of places you can go in life, right? In the business world. I always say when I was in law school, my roommate, who went to dental school, and he became a dentist. He's still my dentist. He's a fantastic dentist. But I remember at one point he said, I'm not sure I want to be a dentist. What do you do with that, right? But with a law degree, as proved out in my career, you can go in a lot of different directions.
Right. And so from there, you obviously got your law degree, became a member of the bar, and you started practicing law, right?
I did. Got through law school. I'd say, well, if we think about law school, I'd say my first year in law school was probably the most difficult year of my life. Pretty miserable. Mm-hmm. Just a lot of stress, and I can think back to the days of, the Socratic method, when the professors in law school would call on us, and I'd try to huddle underneath my desk and try not to be seen. It didn't always work very well, right. But we got through it. I actually ended up doing pretty well, and had a interesting and a good law school experience. Studied for the bar exam, took the bar exam. Actually, I'll go off on a little tangent here, just a funny story. Talk about life lessons, perhaps, in learning how to deal with stress and anxiety. I took the law exam. I was with my girlfriend at the time, and we were at her brother's house, and we packed our lunch for the day. We packed sandwiches and granola bars. So
for taking the bar, for your lunch at taking the bar exam.
Lunch to bring to the bar exam. And during the break between the morning session and the afternoon session, we ate our lunch. I took a bite of my granola bar and another bite, and then I kind of realized the consistency didn't seem right. I looked down, and it was swarming with maggots.
Oof.
And I realized at that time I had just swallowed 2 big chunks of this granola bar. The whole afternoon session, I kind of thought I felt things crawling around in my stomach. But, and of course, like after the exam, I called my doctor that night. He said, "Don't worry about it. It's a little protein, nothing to worry about." But I passed the bar exam. So I feel like if I got through that, it was another layer of skin I earned, right?
I bet. No, seriously. One of our, pardon me for interrupting with a question. There was one of our viewers, C is Better Than, asked, what was the hardest part of law school?
That's a really good question. My kids look at me now and say, "We can't believe you got through law school," because when, there's just a lot of demands, a lot of reading, a lot of studying, a lot of pressure. After I got through that period of stress and anxiety and got more comfortable with it, and it took me a while, I actually really enjoyed it, right? It was so thought-provoking, and you hear that law school teaches you how to think and analyze and deal with various situations. I think I carry that with me today for sure, right? And it just took some adjustment. It was definitely a life growing experience for sure.
One of our top commenters, Mary, awesome Mary, says, has a joke comment: "Did you sue them?" That would have been funny. Yes.
Did I sue them for the maggots?
I think the maggots. Yeah. Who would you have sued? This is a great law school question. The manufacturer, the distributor.
I broke up with my girlfriend. Not that far after that. So yeah.
Somebody had to take the hit, I guess. Take the fall, right?
Yeah.
So you started practicing law.
I started practicing law, and I guess, the comment I'd make now is that we can think about what we want to do. We can think about clear directions. That's a lot of pressure, right? To come up with what you want to be in life. I started at a big law firm in Century City. At the time, I was feeling great about it. As the work progressed, I wasn't finding inner satisfaction with being a lawyer. Billing hours, invisible clients. I really questioned. I looked down the hall at the senior managing partner, and I said to myself, I don't really want to be that guy, right? And so, and I'm grateful now. I'm grateful now that I look back and had that vision, because I have several friends, and I know you do too, David, who are practicing law and perhaps not so thrilled with it, but it's their career and they've stuck with it.
Right.
But I saw that in myself, and I said, I want to do something maybe a little different. And I decided to take a half step out of law, and I went, took an in-house legal position at Mattel, the global toy company, which was a awesome transition for me. And at the time, going in-house wasn't as trendy, I don't think, as it is today.
Mm-hmm.
But I immediately felt a part of the company and had my heart and soul. And overnight, I went from from invisible clients at a big law firm to the lawyer for Barbie and Ken and Hot Wheels and acquiring companies like Fisher Price and
Right.
and
And
it
a
was just
direct
fascinating.
and a direct emotional relationship with the client, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And that was, so when you say invisible client, in a sense, it's because it's just, all intermediated through whoever the managing partner is, and you don't really know the people who you're working for, and there isn't really a lot of human connection in it. And that became something that was really a void for you, if I'm hearing you right.
And that's a great point, right? I mean, and it's not to say, listen, I don't want to tell anyone not to be a lawyer if they have a passion for law, because let's remember, I was a first and second year associate in the law firm, and that's where you got to start.
Right.
As you go on and develop your clientele, that differs. So that's a really fair point.
Yeah. But I am curious, though, you mentioned that you looked at the managing partner down the hall with the big office and the big salary and all that. And you said, and presumably he doesn't have the same level of visibility with his clients, right? He probably has a great deal more. Why was it that you looked down the hall and said, I still don't want to be him, even if I got to that point where some of the other stuff would be better?
In this case, he was just kind of a miserable person.
Well, right. Not very inspiring. Right.
I think he had a failing marriage. He worked 24/7. He didn't really seem to have much life balance. He was certainly beholden to his billable hours, and it just looked pretty distasteful.
Right. Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And imagine, I mean, by the way, going to work for Mattel, I mean, it's kind of every child's dream. Were you a toy kid? Were you like a Hot Wheels kid as a boy? And, did you love toys?
I still, as a matter of fact, have my Hot Wheels collection from when I was 9 years old.
There you go.
Had I thought about it, I would have brought it here. I could have shown you guys. You'd dig it.
That's awesome.
But it was super fun to be involved. That was before I had kids, and I'd bring home bags of toy samples and made the whole neighborhood. I was very popular with the neighborhood.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah. And so another transition came, I spent in total 11 years at Mattel, but about halfway through that time, I had the opportunity to move on to the business side. And when I was at the law firm, I started really thinking about a passion for real estate, because I got exposed to, I worked with the real estate partner. So when I went to Mattel, and it was a much smaller company at that point, I said, if there's anything to do on real estate, I want to do it. So as a lawyer, I worked on real estate transactions. I worked with toy inventors, lots of different things. But the opportunity came to move on to the business side, and I became the global head of real estate for Mattel.
So did that, just to clarify, when you were working at the law firm originally, was that a real estate law firm? Were you doing real estate transactions or a bunch of things?
It was a general practice. So real estate, healthcare, law, research memos mostly.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Right. Okay.
And then, ran the global real estate for Mattel, which was, Mattel had 280 facilities around the world. At that time, manufacturing, retail, office, and just to learn on my feet, really no one there to hold my hand through it. A great way to just cut my teeth in real estate. Traveled, I'd probably average 7 or 8 trips a year to Europe and Asia. Saw a lot of the Far East, and a wonderful opportunity to see the world.
And that's because they sold toys all over the world, so they had offices all over the world, or
offices, manufacturing plants. I spent a week touring through most of France looking for a site for a manufacturing plant to build playhouses for Fisher Price,
Got it.
just very interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And really, really enjoyed that.
That's excellent. So then how did you leap from that to the world of commercial real estate brokering, and why?
Well, there was one more quick step in between, which was the 2000 .com bubble .com era.
Right.
And
I remember it well.
yeah, well, I watched several friends and acquaintances on top of the world with fantastic ideas and startups, including you, David, and in your efforts, your leadership of some companies during that time, and said, "Wow, what an interesting thing to do." And I was approached by a company called Idea Lab, which is still in existence today. They were the original internet incubator, which means they started companies and they provided the foundation both financially and structurally for startup ideas, and went there to kind of set up their global footprint and opened offices around the world for them.
And by the way, so take me into, because that's such a big and frankly courageous leap, because you have a cushy corporate job, which must have had wonderful perks. Somebody was asking about those perks, and awesome. Mary's pointing out to Vince, Gary got to bring home, sacks fulls of toys. I remember visiting you at that time and seeing the bounty of what it was like to be a senior Mattel executive. It was Christmas every day at the Horwitz home. So what would make you leave what I would assume would be a pretty comfortable situation?
Yeah, no. I went from a big corner office on the top floor of a tall office building at Mattel. I think I probably had roughly 100 people reporting to me at that point, to Idea Lab for half my salary. Upside in the way of, that actually an interesting point we'll come back to, but upside in the form of stock options. But I remember my first day at Idea Lab walking into this open plan office space, and someone pointed to my desk, and it was 2 file cabinets with a hollow wood door on top of it. And I said,
fancy.
Oh
Fancy.
crap, what did I do? Right?
Right.
Thinking back, I remember I couldn't figure out how to turn on my computer. Transition, right? Many sleepless nights during that transition. Did I do the right thing? Should I have left my big cushy corporate job?
Right.
So
there was some FOMO going on, as we like to say, right? Fear of missing out, for those who may not be in the know, from one of my favorite terms. So you must have thought there's something over there. The grass was greener from your vantage point, or you just wanted to change, or other factors may have been in play. But I think the audience would really like to know, like, what got in your head, because there aren't that many people that have the courage to do that, or that would do something that radical. Because even if you wanted to leave Mattel, you could go run a business unit for another company, right? So what was it about? What was it? It was people like me and other people that were doing entrepreneurial things, and you were like, I want to do that too. Was it as simple as that? What was?
I think that was a lot of it, because I was happy with my job. It wasn't like I wanted to get out of there. As I used to say, my chair was the shape of my ass. It was very comfortable. And
Use that. That's good.
You can use it. I think it was a lot of the excitement in the air, the excitement in the air of all these new companies, and the excitement of upside.
Right.
So one thing that was my first taste of being in a work and situation from a compensation standpoint, where there was upside, where it was more than just really salary and bonus.
Right.
And I think that was and continues to be an important thing to me.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. So then you get over to Idea Lab, and how does that play out, and how does that lead to the next step?
Idea Lab was crazy. It was all of a sudden I was in this world of, and by the way, Idea Lab at the time was just about to go public. They never did, but I was a superstar for like 2 weeks. I'd be on airplanes and someone found out I worked for Idea Lab, and it was a very interesting time, very high flying time.
A very hot company. I mean, like and I mean, so many people there that are legends before and since, right?
A lot of really, really fantastic ideas and companies have spawned out of Idea Lab.
Right.
So it was fascinating. It was a complete shift for me. I was traveling a lot again, but soon I was there 2+ years, and at the end of that, I was closing down the locations I had opened up. Things had scaled down a little bit, and there really wasn't I could have probably gone on to take a leadership role in one of the portfolio companies, but from a real estate and perspective, which now I was really focused on, that there wasn't that much left to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking around. The logical move would have been another.
The dot-com crash happens, and so there's less action in that regard. Yeah, right.
The logical move would have been another corporate real estate position, but I was approached by a friend. I saw him in the sandwich line at Ralph's, and he said, "Why don't you come talk to us?" A brokerage firm, real estate brokerage firm that was just starting out in LA, that was a New York-based firm that was starting their LA office. Started talking to them, and again made a shift.
Mm-hmm.
I had a bit of a salary at start, but it was mostly kind of a commissioned position from a compensation standpoint.
Was this Staubach, by the way, as I recall, or is it something?
That was pre-Staubach. It was a company called Insignia.
Got it.
And all of a sudden, the major shift for me there was I now had to produce. I now had to get clients and build a business.
Generate
something
revenue.
I've never had to do before.
Right. Which, by the way, it sounds terrifying, when you've come from where you have come from. Was it terrifying, or were you just not so?
It was. I had 2 little kids at that time. I had a family to support, and who knew whether I'd be successful or not. I remember I started in late November, and the holidays started to come around, and I'm used to, during my Idea Lab and Mattel days, getting fruit baskets and wine and chocolate around the holidays from vendors. And I remember saying to someone, "Where's all my fruit baskets?" And he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Dude, you got to send them out now." Right?
I remember a similar transition in my life, and what I really missed was the champagne. I used to, every Christmas, it was like Dom Perignon, Krug, Louis Roederer, Cristal. It was just, I always had, like, literally anytime I needed a bottle of very expensive champagne, I just went to a closet where there was a stack left over from holidays past. Yeah, that's all over. Right.
The other transition to that side of the world, which I still live in today, is, as we have to develop business, I'd go to a party and realize, hey, who should I be looking around and talking to?
Right.
Who can be a lead for me? And that was a whole new mindset. In a way, it was a complete mind shift, just in life, right? Everyday life. And that took some transition, for sure.
Yeah. So how quickly did you meet the challenge? How quickly did you generate some revenue at Insignia, or did you, or was it the next company?
Um, it was. It says my internet connection's unstable. Okay, I'm good. It took a good couple of years. I got my feet on the ground at Insignia, and then I remember one of my first big wins was started working with a startup airline, which turned out to be Virgin America, and they had two people, and we were looking for a headquarters somewhere in the United States, and that was really fun.
And how did you get that business? How did you hustle that up? Did you meet someone at a party, or how did that happen?
It was a lead through our New York office, and I called the guy and developed a relationship with him, and he wasn't ready to do anything then. And 6 months later, it was time, and we talked again, and we had to go through a formal pitch and compete against, I think, 4 or 5 other firms, and we got hired.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great. So, so you took all of your learnings from pitching and creating a presentation, which you'd probably done several times in your career in one form or another, right?
Yes.
And you did it. That's awesome.
We did it.
Ella, my bunny Valentine, says having to close is stressful. I can imagine. And so you're off to the races, and then you deal with Virgin America's deal, which is, by the way, a very hot company. And connecting the dots, this is one of my questions for you. I'm jumping ahead in my own questions, but how do you manage to get associated with such cool companies? I'm not saying you're not a cool guy, Gary, because you are, but like, it's uncanny. It's like Snap and Beyond Meat and DirecTV. I mean, these are really cool companies. Virgin America, like those are 4 of the 20 coolest companies there would be to go find space for. So
thank you.
Is it luck? Is it charm? Is it, don't be bashful? Is it, what is, or, what?
Lucky charms. It's a thank you. I'm super grateful, right? I'm super appreciative. I've been very fortunate. I've worked really hard, and we have to work very smartly. Listen, in this business, in any sales kind of position, you got to be really human, and you have to be genuine, I think, and people feel that and see that. And I think I'm able to connect with some people, and not as well with others.
You are on that. You are off the level playing field, my friend, because there is no one more genuine or more sort of, kind of likable than you. So I think that's an interesting characteristic. And I'm glad to know that helps, because we were talking about this. I was telling you about a friend of ours, a mutual friend, who was once told that he was too nice to be in the business you're in. And you said that you were once told the same thing, was there any truth to that? Did you have to become less nice in order to succeed? And, or is that just a faulty assumption that you can't be nice and succeed?
I think it's a balance, right? When I first started in brokerage, someone who I really respect and trust watched me negotiate a deal and came up to me after and said, "You're way too damn nice. You got to be more of a jerk. You got to be tougher. You're never going to make it in this business." And that stuck with me, actually. I think you got to pick your battles, and there's times to be nice and there's times to stand your ground. And I think about that all the time. And I pride myself on my negotiation skills, and there's times to absolutely not be nice.
Right. Well, to be tough, I would say, yes.
To be tough.
Well, as Coach Wooden once advised, you can disagree without being disagreeable. So I bet you're never disagreeable, but I'm sure that you have to take a hard line in negotiations on many occasions, right?
Often.
So then the rocket blasts off, and you're succeeding, and you've got a big name, quality, marquee client to your resume. And then what happens?
there was a transition of firms. We went to my firm was acquired by CB, Richard Ellis at the time. And for those of you out there that know the commercial real estate world, where I work now is called JLL. And that's the second largest, commercial real estate, global real estate firm. The largest is CB. So CB acquired Insignia. I partnered up with some other folks who had been in the business a lot longer than I had. And that's where my career really started to take off.
Right.
That's where when we went to CB wiped out any salary components, another transition. Now I'm like, oh man, now I'm 100% commission. There's no guarantee of anything. And fortunately, that's where things started to really pick up the most. 5 of us from CB left and started another firm in LA called Staubach. And then eventually JLL acquired Staubach. So a few moves on my part, a few acquisitions that I was involved with.
Right.
And now, listen, I love what I do. I run our tenant rep practice here in Los Angeles. I'm one of the leaders of it. And so I just represent companies, big and small, some really exciting clients. David mentioned a couple. We started with Snapchat at the time when they were 12 people, and helped them open up 18 different office locations in Venice, California, and then closed all those and opened up a 400,000 square foot headquarters in Santa Monica. Now I represent companies like WebMD and Kaiser and law firms, and I just did a small donut shop deal for a friend. That's really all across the board.
That's really fun. I think the audience would love to hear the story of Snapchat, because I think it teaches a lot of business lessons to all of us. So please tell us about that. How did that relationship come about? I think it's quite inspiring.
Yeah, I mean, certainly an important part of what I do is networking and knowing people who are connected to other people. And I don't, my personal thing, I don't do any cold calling. That's just not the way I've built my business. My business has been built through referrals and personal relationships. So I was having a drink with a good friend of mine who was a senior lawyer at a big law firm in LA. And I knew him from Idea Lab. He was at Idea Lab with me. And I said, David, do you, if you know anyone who needs help, because he had represented a lot of startup companies. And he said to me, well, there's this little company called Snap. I have no idea if they're going to be real, but they're looking for 2,000 feet if you want to help them. And I at first said, well, maybe, I don't know if we have time for that. Do you think they'll be real? And he said, I have no idea. But we did it. And I talked to Evan Spiegel on the phone, and we found their first office in Venice.
Was the founder, of course, right?
Founder of Snap. And it went on from there. Yeah.
You started with a 1,200 square foot office for Evan. And do you remember anything about your interaction with him in those first discussions and negotiations that stuck in your mind that helped you understand his vision or what he needed you to do for him?
I do remember having a beer with him after we closed the deal for that first office. And I said, Evan, is this thing real? How are you going to monetize this? And I remember this very clear. I mean, he was 23 at the time. And he said, I don't even think about that. We're gonna change the world. We're gonna change the way the world communicates. He had talk about vision and clarity of vision then. He had it then and he proved it.
Isn't that cool?
Really cool story, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And one of our commenters was sort of noticing that, obviously COVID-19 has changed everything in society, and I'm sure that there's been some substantial impact to the real estate world world. Vince Guzman, who's one of our regular viewers and commenters, was just wondering what your biggest adjustment had to be in that in the commercial real estate world as a result of.
Yeah, it's a great question. Last year was my slowest year in probably 12 years or 13 years.
Wow.
Things really came to a pretty screeching halt, and my clients were either contemplating, what they're going to do with their office space, but they certainly weren't thinking about growing. So not much happened other than the Beyond Meat transaction, which filled up most of my year last year, which was the headquarters for Beyond Meat, which was a difficult deal to get done during COVID for obvious reasons. Boards of directors weren't necessarily enthralled with the idea of taking on more office space commitments.
Right.
In their case, it's mostly an R&D use and critical to their to what they do, so a very necessary function.
Mm-hmm.
But things really came to a halt. So that then transitioned to, what does the future of office space look like? And it's been fascinating, right? Because high rises suddenly became something that weren't nearly as attractive because people didn't want to get in elevators together. I'm saying past tense because fortunately we're in a better place today, and I think we're not there by any means, but there's more of an openness. We can see the light at the end of the tunnel a little bit. So now let's just fast forward. Today we're talking about, I had this conversation 4 times today. When are we coming back to the office? And when we come back to the office, where we used to sit 8 people to a long table, how are we going to space people out? And I'll tell you, there's a lot of discussion now. Some of my clients are saying, we're going to be back in the office. If they're not already there, we're going to be back in the office June 1st. We may require that our employees coming back are vaccinated. But where we use a metric of, during the really dense office space would be like 125 feet per employee of space. Now it's more like 175 feet, more spaced out.
Interesting.
So the workplace will transition a bit. I personally do not believe any of this commentary that office space is a thing of the past. I think people want to get out of the house to a great extent, and CEOs want to get their employees back into the office. I think if you fast forward 18 months, it's going to look a lot more like it did pre-COVID than now.
Right.
But there will be a percentage of the workforce that's going to stay, remote. I think there's a lot of jobs that people realize don't have to be in an office environment, but we're still transitioning. So that was a long-winded answer to that question. Last year was really, really quiet. This year, I'm as busy as I've ever been. There was some pent-up demand, and we're rolling again.
I'm glad to hear that. I made this series primarily, Gary, to kind of pay it forward and pass along advice to people who, you and I had a lot of benefits, and we had a lot, even though we're not from wealthy families, we had a lot of, we had a great public education. We had great mentors. We had lucky breaks. We had great, companies that we managed to get into. I want to pass along that advice today. So based on everything you know today, if there's a young person out there who's just starting their careers, trying to figure it out, what advice would you give them? They want to do what you do. They say they want to have the life that Gary Horwitz has. They want to work with these exciting clients. They want to make the big bucks. They want to, play in that high flying, world. What advice do you have from them? How can they prepare? What should they know? What are some paths they can take?
Yeah, thanks. I think a couple things come to mind. You guys just heard my path. who would have predicted psychology major to lawyer to law firm to in-house to .com to real estate? I would never have been able to script that when I was in college. So, one thing I'd offer is don't stress out too much about decisions. It's too hard. How do you chart it? How do you know? How do you know what the next step is? Opportunities come your way. So it's certainly of value to do research and deep thought on what careers sound interesting, but don't put too much pressure on that. Don't put too much pressure on those decisions. You don't have to cut off your arm if you don't like it.
Right.
And you can switch. So
Right.
my career is a really good example of not totally being able to predict that. And as I look back, I made a lot of hard decisions in transition, but I don't feel like I made a wrong decision any step of the way.
Right.
Some of them haven't been perfect.
Right. Why do you think that so many people are so reluctant to make those switches? That hapless attorney at the end of the hall who was miserable. Why do you think that people don't say, let's take that brave leap?
Transition's hard, right? And there's a whole spectrum of risk taking out there too.
Right.
And there's, I don't feel like I'm a big risk taker. I feel like I'm very calculating in my decisions usually. But it's hard to transition. It's scary.
Right.
Scary. But I will say, if you do it smartly with open eyes, knowing that it's not a forever decision, makes it easier.
In retrospect, when you were under that pressure, you said you had the 2 young children, and suddenly you find out you have no base salary and it's all commission and you have to generate your own clients. In retrospect, does it seem like that was a great thing for you to experience? That it was good for you to be under that kind of pressure because it forced you, I'm thinking of the UCLA team getting to the Final Four, because it sort of forced you to up your game and it forced you to learn how to sort of face that level of pressure?
Absolutely. Right. Pressure's good sometimes. When I said I was super comfortable and not sweating it all at Mattel, I probably wasn't advancing so much. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
I can imagine. By the way, if other people in the audience have questions they'd like to ask, I welcome them. Just type them into the comments section, and we'll get them to you. Gary, I think the workforce that's coming into the world is more diverse than ever. Women are fully 50% of the workplace, and so forth. Is there more sort of emphasis on diversity and inclusion in your industry? And how are you and your company dealing with that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. There's not nearly enough diversity in my industry. I'll speak of Los Angeles. I think JLL is the leader at the forefront of all that. We have lots of discussion and lots of focus and emphasis on diversity. I just hired a new associate, and she just graduated from USC last year, and she's wonderful. And there's too many guys in my office, and we need different perspectives. So there's plenty of room for improvement, but I feel like there's more of an acknowledgement of that today than I've ever seen in the past. So maybe that's a start.
That's good.
Yeah.
Great. I want to also encourage the audience. I think it's really fun for our, because we have lots of viewers, and I think it's fun for Gary to know where you're viewing from. Like we had a hello from Lynchburg. I thought Boston, and I'm happy to do a geography call out to anybody else, so that we all acknowledge all of your viewers around the world, Gary, because you have a company and a set of activities that takes you around the world, which is one of the cool things about the place about the industry you're working in. I'm kind of
Dave,
curious. I would like to ask my friends. Oh, go ahead, Gary.
No, I was just another thought I have is, I think we just need to really individually explore our DNA, right? As we think about career choices, as we think in my world, for example, there's, people kids coming in tell me, hey, I want to be in real estate. And I say, well, what do you mean? And think about yourself. Do you want to be more, are you a front lines person? Do you want to be interacting with people, which leads more to the sales portion of it, to the brokerage part of it? Or are you someone who'd rather be kind of at your desk, back office kind of function, analytics, in a support role? And there's no good or bad or right or wrong for either of those. Both of those kind of roles are definitely very important. So you really got to think where you are most comfortable, and that leads to a couple different ways, especially in my industry. And by the way, a lot of that does directly tie in with compensation too, because if you're on the front lines, there's an opportunity to be, a commission, more upside kind of role. In the background, it's more of a salaried role. So it's how much is that comp upside important to you? All those kind of decisions, but just kind of look inside a little bit, and that really should, I think, help guide a bit.
Cool. Good advice. Thank you, Adriana. Thank you, Lenny P. Amherst, Massachusetts in the house. Elizabeth from New Jersey, Raleigh, North Carolina, Colorado, Alhambra, Guatemala. That's quite a sample of some of the places that people are tuning in on. Gary, did you have mentors along the way? And if so, what kind of advice did they give you that was memorable?
I did, I have had mentors. When I was a lawyer at Mattel, the general counsel at the time, who I reported to, who went on to become the president of Mattel, was an amazing mentor, is still a close friend. And, he wasn't the kind of guy who would sit down and say, here's what you should be doing, or here's how you should, lead your life or career. But he was a great example of a terrific family person. And we talked about balance a lot, which is always, he was a great example just to follow and watch. But he was a person who always seemed to have good balance in his life, which, as I think back, college, right? It's about balance. It's about how much do I study and how much do I party?
Mm-hmm.
And we all know people who party too much and fell off the ledge. And we know people who studied too much and missed out on,
didn't have a college experience,
all the fun in life. And when you think back at college, to me, those folks who are in college now, you got to find that balance, because learning the social part of, interacting with people and how to, talk and communicate, I think was every bit as important as what I learned in the classroom. I think it's arguably more important for me today than what I learned in the classroom. For sure it is. Well, and then it's the balance of, sorry?
Well, it's all about the relationships and people skills and emotional IQ and all that. And in your kind of business, if you're gonna bring big transactions together, you must have very sharp people skills, right? It'd be impossible not to.
That's what it's all about, for sure.
Right.
And then later on, it was balancing family and work. Do I work too much? Am I missing out on my kids and my wonderful marriage? And that's a balance.
Right.
And balance now. Now it's, working and relaxing a little bit more now that the girls are grown up. So I just encourage everyone to really, it's a struggle, but try to find that balance.
Mm-hmm. what was on the Gary Horwitz reading list on the way? Were there books that you remember that really helped you and inspired you along the way that you'd pass along to others?
I'm reading The Power of Now right now.
Ooh, great book. Terrific.
Which I read many years ago, which is so relevant to me now because it's always a struggle to be present. But it's, for me, to be aware of when I'm present and when I'm not is a huge thing. And I'm growing all the time with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd recommend that book to anyone.
I don't think if I hadn't grown somewhat in that, I don't think I could do this interview show. I really don't, because I think that the fundamental skill of it is just being in the moment with the person that you're having the conversation with. You know, if I'm not in the moment with you, it's just somehow not a real conversation, you know? So I agree with you 100%. Any other titles?
My wife, who's a marriage and family therapist, calls me out all the time for not being in the moment and not being present and pretending like I'm listening, but I'm only halfway there. And I can't claim to be a great listener, but she keeps me on the straight path a little bit.
I think until I was 40 years old, I'm not sure that I was ever present at any time, you know? So I empathize with you in that regard. And I'm sure Cam would have correctly diagnosed me if she knew me in my early days. You know, I another question I love to ask my subjects is mistakes. If you don't mind talking about any that you made, because we always love learning from other people's mistakes rather than having to make the same ones ourselves. Do any come to mind that have good lessons for you and for others?
I don't know that I would have eaten that maggot-infested granola bar.
By the way, you know, the irony is it's about being present. If you were present, you'd be looking at the granola bar before you put it in your mouth, and you would have happened to know. It's like a perfect spiritual lesson in the advantages of being present and the disadvantages of not being present.
Yeah. You know, this might be a cop-out, but I'm not. I try not to live in the past too much. So right. I'm struggling with coming up with, you know, specific mistakes. I've made a million of them.
I'll give you one from my life that somebody asked me about in a Q&A once about my job. I've also had big corporate positions and leadership positions in different jobs where I've been in charge of lots and lots of people. And unfortunately, what goes along with that responsibility sometimes is firing people. And I can think of someone in my career that I was persuaded by other subordinates that we had to get rid of. It was an executive. And I fired this executive, and I never felt good about it. I realize in retrospect, it wasn't that this person was an outstanding employee, but I don't think we'd been fair with him. I don't think that we'd given him a chance. I don't think that we'd given him the feedback that would be right before you take an action like that. And I was so pressed into it. And it was my mistake. I'm not pointing the finger at anybody else. I was pressured and I yielded to the pressure when I shouldn't have. So I look back on that and I say, yeah, that's a mistake I made. It's like sometimes you do have to fire somebody, you know, and sometimes frankly, you don't feel bad about it because they acted really inappropriately or did something, but that's one. So I just always say, like, you know, like always do the right thing. You know, the lesson for myself is I think I went against my heart. I think I sort of talked myself out of what my conscience said. And fortunately that hasn't happened very often, but that's one example I would give just in case it, you know, causes anything to come to mind like that.
Yeah. I think of a particular negotiation at the start of my career, and the deal actually blew up, and I think I could have saved it. And when I realized, and which is far more clear to me today than it was then, is I took a position I couldn't see the person I was negotiating with position at all. I didn't take the time, I didn't make the effort to see it from their perspective. I was so blinded by my own. Right. And
or self-righteous about it, you know.
Right.
Right.
And I think, it's so important to take a moment just in so many aspects of life and try to really understand where that other person is coming from and acknowledge it, by the way. And I think that was a mistake that I definitely learned from, I think.
Got it. Another one of our top commenters, Vince Guzman, says, Gary, does your wife keep you on the straight and narrow?
So I am blessed to have a 27-year marriage with a wonderful, loving wife who keeps me in line totally.
She is super cool, I have to say. You're absolutely right. You know,
she is a second career for her to become a marriage and family therapist, and I do have to say, sometimes quit analyzing me, right?
A common complaint, I would imagine, of spouses and therapists.
Right.
I do want to mention. Oh, wait, we've got a hello from Edinburgh. That's pretty cool. I did want to ask the question, and it came up from some of the other commenters as well. Did your law degree come in handy in ways that you couldn't have anticipated? Do you ever find yourself in a situation, even in your role today, where you're like, because I'm a lawyer, I have an advantage, or because of a lawyer, I'm thinking of things differently than my colleagues who may not have that background?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. I use my law degree every day. I mean, I don't give legal advice, but I'm dealing with contracts and words every day. So that part's important. But that way of thinking helped shape what I do. It's also frankly, it's a terrific selling point sometimes to say I was a lawyer. I think some people like that. Mm-hmm. As it is when I'm calling on corporate real estate executives to tell them I was a corporate real estate person, and that, definitely connects with some people. So we started to say it before, the law degree, even though I haven't practiced law for a long time now, that has been a terrific background. I would say, if you don't think you want to be a lawyer, I'm not sure I'd go to law school because it's an expensive, long trek. But just know, if you are thinking about that path, it opens up many opportunities in addition to law.
Right. By the way, this hour has flown by. We're almost at the end, but if somebody has a last minute question, I'm more than happy to entertain it. In the meantime, I'll just say to Gary, is there anything else that you would have to pass along? Any wisdom, any other things I didn't ask you about that you'd like to sort of pass along as inspiration or advice to those seeking your path?
Again, I'd just reiterate, similar to what I said before, each step of the way is a learning, right? So in college, I learned how to deal with people. At the law firm, I learned how to, deal with clients. In law school, I learned how to think like that and problem solve. At Mattel, I learned the corporate mindset. And that whole bundle, I think, again, I use every day. So it's be open to whatever paths open up in front of you, and don't worry too much about the future.
That's what a perfect piece of advice to end on. That's wonderful. Gary, if somebody wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that? Probably,
I've given up a lot of my social media, but LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Great.
My LinkedIn page. I'm happy to communicate that way.
That's very gracious of you. I'm sure if people have bits of advice they're looking for that I didn't cover, they'll appreciate being able to contact you that way. Thanks so much, Gary, for being with me. This was, you shared so much, and it was everything I was hoping it would be. We've got Raymond and Lisa and others that are complimenting you on some great advice and a great chat. Elizabeth says, thanks, gentlemen. Appreciate it, Elizabeth. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time for another interview. And thanks again, Gary. Take care.
Thank you, David.